Welcome to Gospel Lessons. I'm Kevin Prince. Today we're continuing our series on false traditions, beliefs we often pass down in the church but are not rooted in Scripture or the Gospel. Today we will be discussing priesthood. Joining me is Bruce Porter, a renowned scholar with degrees in ancient Near Eastern and Middle East studies, specializing in Semitic languages and religious history. Bruce has authored over 16 books and is well known for his research on the Pearl of Great Price. I first met him on a life-changing tour in 2018, which inspired this Gospel Lessons YouTube channel. Now, if you've never traveled with Bruce, I highly recommend it. He frequently speaks and guides on LDS-based cruises with Go and Do Travel. These cruises offer opportunities to connect with like-minded members and learn from speakers like Bruce. I'll be joining the Momentum 2026 cruise with him, and if you're interested, use promo code PRINCE for $100 off. All proceeds from Gospel Lessons, including sponsorships, go to charity. Welcome back, Bruce.
It's good to be here with you, Kevin.
Today we're going to talk about the priesthood, and this is something that we're taught about since we're very, very young, and we're basically given the understanding, at least the way I've been taught it, is that the priesthood is the power and authority of God, or God's power and authority given to man to do his work on earth. But the more I study the priesthood, in some ways it gets more confusing about what it really is. In particular, the way Joseph Smith talked about priesthood seems to be in some ways different than what we're taught today. So let's talk about priesthood and help us understand better what the priesthood is and how we can apply it in our lives.
All right, it's an interesting question. Years ago, it's probably been 40 years ago, maybe, I went through everything that Joseph Smith said about priesthood chronologically. So I took from Moroni talking about Elijah revealing the priesthood from the first vision to his death. I took everything that was ever said to him by revelation, everything that he ever said about priesthood, and anything that was ever translated within Scripture or given to us by revelation in Scripture about priesthood. So I put all that together chronologically just so I could see the development of the priesthood in Joseph Smith's mind, from the first vision to the martyrdom. And I typed it all out. I got it in every book, everything I could ever find that he said, diaries, everything that about priesthood, just so I could see a chronological growth or a chronological understanding of the priesthood within the mind of Joseph Smith. And so I've done that, and I've come to some a different view and understanding than what is traditionally taught in the church. We revere the priesthood more sometimes than we revere the gospel. And the priesthood is really, you hear people talk about power of the priesthood. I even remember a letter coming out from the first presidency to all the bishops and stake presidents saying that within our blessings or ordinations, we shouldn't use by the power of the priesthood, but we should use the authority of the priesthood.
I remember that.
And that's more correct than using the power of the priesthood. I hear all the time people talking about the healing power of the priesthood. Well, we don't have, as Latter-day Saints, as members of the church, we don't have a monopoly on righteousness. We don't have a monopoly on spiritual experiences. We don't have a monopoly on even miracles and blessings and healings within our church compared to any other church. We don't have a monopoly on that. The only thing that we have a monopoly on would be priesthood authority and the ordinances that are connected to that priesthood authority. But we have no monopoly on faith. We have no monopoly on charity or love. We have no monopoly on these. And the Lord, he's not going to restrict somebody else's blessings, spiritual blessings, because they're not a member of the church. So the question comes down, so what is that priesthood authority? In my ward recently, I hear the phrase, the healing power of the priesthood. And so I went back in the Scriptures. There's nowhere in the Scriptures that a miracle or a healing took place where the apostles or Christ ever invoked the priesthood authority, the priesthood in that miracle. Even the scriptures, the New Testament, as well as the Book of Mormon, even the Doctrine and Covenants tells us that to some is given speaking of the gifts of the Spirit, which it can be to member and non-member both. It says to some is given the faith to heal, and some the faith to be healed. Now that can be without any priesthood. That doesn't have to have priesthood, and the priesthood is not invoked in any miracle or blessing that we see within Scripture itself. When you look at Scripture, we invoke the priesthood so it can be recorded on the records of the church. That's really the whole issue. The main issue of the priesthood is the authority to administer the gospel within the ordinances and within a given stewardship, and have those recorded on the records of the church. As we were counseled by the letter from the First Presidency, it's not a power as we might call it, because the question can be asked, does God have priesthood? Or does he have an inherent power? Does Christ have priesthood? Or does he have an inherent power within himself, or an inherent authority within himself? The Father doesn't have the Melchizedek priesthood because that's Christ's priesthood. The Melchizedek priesthood is the holy priesthood after the order of the Son of God. The Father has patriarchal priesthood. And so there's a whole difference there. So does God have priesthood? Now, even the term priesthood means something that you put on somebody, something that you give somebody, hence the word hood. You're a priesthood means it's something that's given and bestowed upon you. So does God have priesthood? Or is it the power or the authority that's inherent in him? So when we talk about priesthood, it's an authority that's given to us to act in God's name. It's not necessarily a power to heal or a power to move mountains, because we're told that it's faith that can move the mountains. Even Christ says it's the faith that moves the mountain, not the priesthood. And so we sometimes get carried away and think more of the priesthood than we do of the gospel of Jesus Christ, because it's the faith that's required that moves the mountain. It's the faith that's required to heal or to be healed. Not so much the priesthood. The priesthood is an authority to administer the gospel. And that's what Abraham is told there in chapter 2 of the book of Abraham, that this right to administer the gospel, the blessings of salvation and life eternal, this right will continue in thee and thy seed after thee. That's the priesthood that he's talking about. Now, Joseph said and taught that there were 3 different priesthoods. He taught that there's a Melchizedek priesthood, there's a patriarchal priesthood, and there's an Aaronic priesthood within the church. And he says the patriarchal priesthood we get in the temple, and that's when a husband or a man and a woman are married and then are sealed in the temple. They enter into that order of the priesthood, meaning the new and everlasting covenant of marriage. That order of the priesthood is the patriarchal priesthood. That's an authority within the home. The man and the woman hold the patriarchal priesthood equally within the home, and that's a higher priesthood. The Melchizedek priesthood is for the temporal and spiritual welfare of mankind, and the time will come when that Melchizedek authority and those keys are given back to Christ, and they're no longer needed. But the authority of the celestial kingdom is a patriarchal authority, that of a father and that of a mother, a husband and a wife. Now that authority of the husband and wife is so strong that the church itself must acquiesce to the authority of the father and the mother in the home. Even though we may have a priesthood leader in the church, or the bishop, be it the bishop or the stake president, doesn't matter. They must acquiesce. They must bow down to the authority of the father and the mother of that home, be they member or non-member. They have to bow down to that authority. And that's the authority that God has, is patriarchal. And that's what we might call the patriarchal priesthood. And that every man and woman who are sealed, or even married to a certain extent, who are sealed, enter into that order of the priesthood. That's the patriarchal priesthood. So every man holds that patriarchal priesthood who's married in the temple, and every woman holds that patriarchal priesthood who's married and sealed in the temple to her husband. They both hold that patriarchal priesthood. And that's a higher priesthood. I mean, that's the priesthood of the celestial kingdom. That's the authority of the celestial kingdom. Now on earth, the priesthood of Christ, the order of a patriarch, or the purpose of a patriarch, and there's grand patriarchs and then there's family patriarchs. The grand patriarchs are Adam and Seth, Canaan, Adam, Seth, Enos, Canaan, Mahalalel, Jared, Enoch, Methuselah, Lamech, Noah, right down to Shem, Arphaxad, Reu, Eber, Peleg, right on down to Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. Those are the grand patriarchs. And those grand patriarchs have to have the Melchizedek authority also, because that Melchizedek authority is Christ's authority. It's his authority. It's the holy priesthood after the order of the Son of God, and that's a priesthood that can function outside of a family line. Section 105, I believe it's 107 of the Doctrine and Covenants, talks about the patriarchal priesthood and how it goes from family to family and is passed down from father to son. That's a patriarchal priesthood. But these grand patriarchs needed a Melchizedek authority without father or mother, as the scriptures explain, so that they can perform ordinances for a missing or unworthy patriarch. So they can administer the gospel for a missing or unworthy patriarchs. And that's Christ's authority. Christ has that authority, that Melchizedek authority, and that as the firstborn son and the birthright son of the Father, Christ has the authority to take care of the temporal and spiritual welfare of all his Father's creation. That's the Melchizedek authority. That's Christ's authority for the temporal and spiritual welfare of all his Father's creation. So a patriarch in the home has that authority for the temporal and spiritual welfare of his family. So Abel is chosen to be the new grand patriarch, but he's murdered, and so it moves down to Seth. Seth now has to have does not only have the patriarchal authority for his own family, but he must have the Melchizedek authority to assist his father in all his brothers and sisters, his nieces and nephews, to assist his father in all of his father's posterity and their temporal and spiritual welfare. So he needs a Melchizedek authority, and that's Christ's authority. And so the grand patriarchs are a patriarch within their own home, but they must have that Melchizedek authority. Now, the Melchizedek authority is the authority to administer the gospel outside of your family line. I could, having been sealed in the temple, I could take one of my children, I could bless them by the authority of the patriarchal priesthood, which I hold with my spouse even. But we both hold that patriarchal authority, that patriarchal priesthood. And I could bless my children, but the second I go to my neighbor or somebody that I minister to, I can't use the patriarchal authority. I have to use the authority of Christ, which authority is for the temporal and spiritual welfare of all his Father's posterity, all of God's, all of mankind. So I have to have a Melchizedek authority. It's an authority to administer the gospel. A lot of people say, well, I think women ought to be able to hold the priesthood. Well, what priesthood? They hold the priesthood if they've been sealed. They already hold that priesthood, the patriarchal priesthood. When a father leaves the home, and they often tell their priest, their 16-year-old priest, you're the priesthood holder of the home now. That's not necessarily true. The highest priesthood in the home is the matriarch, and the matriarch holds that patriarchal priesthood. She is the highest priesthood holder in that home, not the Aaronic priesthood holder, but the matriarch is.
So you are saying that women hold the patriarchal priesthood if sealed in the temple, and it isn't a male-only priesthood, which we might think from the name, but rather an authority given to parents from God the Father, the grand patriarch of all of his children. He gives this to both men and women when they enter into the new and everlasting covenant in the temple for the purpose of blessing their family. But I think that women who make this argument are thinking about it in a different way.
Women will often say, well, I think we ought to hold the women ought to be able to hold the priesthood. Well, they're immediately talking about the Melchizedek priesthood. But the Melchizedek authority is connected to the phrase in the scriptures, especially in the Old Testament, where it says to take care of the fatherless, the widows, and the orphans. Now, there's a common element between the fatherless, the widows, and the orphans. And that common element is a missing patriarch. Can be a missing or unworthy patriarch. So the Melchizedek authority, the technical purpose of the Melchizedek authority is to step in and make sure the temporal and spiritual needs are met for those who do not have a patriarch. That's why the church must acquiesce to the authority of the patriarch and matriarch of the home. So a woman, people need to understand that the Melchizedek priesthood is to take the place of a missing or unworthy patriarch. This is why women will not hold the Melchizedek priesthood. They already hold a patriarchal priesthood within their own family, but they will not hold the Melchizedek authority because the Melchizedek authority is to take the place of a missing or unworthy patriarch.
Fascinating. Well, this has been just super enlightening, Bruce. One of my very favorites so far. Thank you so much, Bruce. Appreciate it.
Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks for joining us today and learning about false traditions. Remember to subscribe so future episodes are easier to find. Thanks for watching.